Since Bavaria started building powerboats in 2001, it's become really well known for its mid-sized sports cruisers, really well priced two-deck sports cruisers with traditional inboard propulsion. And that was completely evident when the new SR line emerged in the form of the SR41. That boat went straight on to win our own MBY Motorboat of the Year award in the under 50-foot cruiser category. Well, here we have the smaller sister for that boat, the SR36. So given how great the 41 was, there's every reason to get pretty excited about this boat. Now, before we get on board this new SR36, which is incidentally the first in the UK, courtesy of the guys at Clipper Marine down in Swanwick, it's interesting to look at the styling of the thing. And the SR range was designed to be a kind of cross between the sporting underpinnings of the established S-Class sports cruisers and the more kind of upmarket aesthetic of the R-Class, and you absolutely see that here. Well, the 41 had a kind of one-piece hull window which stretched back and then dipped down in the same kind of style as perhaps some of Princess or Sunseeker's cruisers. This features two separate hull windows, a long one above and a shorter one just below. Now, whether you enjoy that aesthetic more or less than the dipping one-piece window that the 41 uses, there's no doubt that it's more distinctive. I mean, you could see this boat from a distance and know exactly what it is without having to guess the brand. Up above that, there's plenty of glass. We've got a big one-piece screen at the front and a nice dip as it works its way aft, and that's a dip that's echoed in this hard top up there, in that hard top moulding. And interestingly, at this back end here of the saloon, instead of fiberglass stanchions that kind of break that glass section, we've got a couple of stainless steel stanchions, which is obviously designed to improve visibility from inside, but at the same time it gives a sense, as you can see, that this entire hardtop is floating. It's completely divorced from the lower fiberglass mouldings, and that looks very cool. And actually, having seen some Bavaria cruisers from the past, some hard-top cruisers that looked very kind of elevated and lofty, a little bit noddy car, not very dynamic, this, despite being a very voluminous boat compared to the S36, it also looks very dynamic, very raked, quite low profile. It's a lovely looking thing. We're out on the water now, and the sun has come out as the Met Office promised it would. So we're going to have a little drive, but before we do that, I just want to talk a little bit about the design and the layout in this forward part of the cockpit. In particular, we'll start with the co-pilot's position. Now, of course, because we've got this chaise longue elevated to increase that volume down below in that midships cabin, we've only got space for a relatively compromised co-pilot seat down here. It's quite small. It would be relatively comfortable, but if you lean back at the moment, the backrest comes away from its Velcro fastening, so that's not ideal. It is, of course, the first boat into the UK, so the guys down here are working hard on creating a really good usable solution for that before they take it to the Southampton show, so it's ready to exhibit in all regards. If we move across to the Helm station itself, it's designed for one person, but it's actually a really quite a generous space. There's plenty of width here. The seat comes with a built-in bolster as well, plus a pair of footrests. We got one engineered into the moulding for the Helm unit itself, and another fold-down footrest built into the seat base. So that means that you can fold down the seat, take it easy when you're underway, and just relax with your feet on this footrest here. Or if you want to stand up and enjoy a more active drive, you can brace yourself against the bolster, push into that footrest there, and it's a very comfortable position with good all-round visibility as well. I have to say, you can see the skyline even when you're up on your feet. The wheel, of course, is also adjustable. It can come right down, low, or relatively high for the standing position, and that's particularly useful because the Helm seats here, they have no forward and aft adjustability, and the reason for that, of course, is the fact that we got this enormous wet bar, and that's a great asset for this cockpit, so it's not something I'm going to quibble about in the slightest. To starboard, we have this enormous shelf to house your optional joystick control and also your twin throttles. We also got this window to the side of you, so you can get yourself some ventilation as on the port side, and you can also shout at your crew when they're getting everything wrong and it's not entirely your fault at all. Let me just move this wheel slightly out of the way so I can get to the rest of the bits and bobs. If we look at the rest of the dash here, everything's really very nicely arranged, and it's relatively sparse, but you've got everything you need. For a start, we've got a pair of 9-inch plotters. I think the standard is a 7-incher, but the owner of this has opted for a couple of these 9-inchers, and they're angled very nicely on this kind of matte grey backing, so there's no glare at all. And although I thought there'd be a little bit of glare from the Volvo Penta display down here because it's quite flat, you'd expect to see the sky reflecting with this sunroof wide open. Actually, the position you drive from means that you're basically getting light bouncing off this this muted kind of dash here. So everything is very visible, very well positioned. We also got the bow thruster to supplement your joystick control, so it's a very much a stress-free boat in terms of close quarters manoeuvring, and that's a handy asset on a boat like this, you know, a relatively traditional cruiser with a decent bit of windage. And talking of windage, we've got the trim tabs right here with an easy reach of your throttle hand, exactly where you would want them. Elsewhere, we also got a cup holder, we got a compass in your eye line, we've got a wireless phone charger, and also got a couple of USB ports here, which is good to see. Now, let's get this bolster back up and we'll take a little drive. I should also say, as we get underway, that it seems like a relatively quiet boat. Now, it's got those big D4 300s back there, but when we're sitting there at idle, we're only seeing 68, 70 decibels, which is very decent indeed. And we've already had a little drive of this boat, and even at the top end, with about 31, 32 knots on the clock, we're still only getting sort of 80 to 85 decibels, which is perfectly civilized when you're underway. So we'll push on, get her up onto the plane, give her a little bit of trim, and we're hitting the plane at about 7 seconds at about 15 knots, and then cruising through to about 20 knots. Just give her a little bit of correction with the tabs. What's immediately evident from this, aside from the fact that she's very quick and very happy to just move up onto the plane without pointing skywards and obscuring your view, is the fact that she's tremendously stable. She's got a little bit of extra beam compared to the S-Class 36-footer, and you can feel it. If we get up to pace a little bit more, you can also kind of feel that in the turn. So if we get up to about 30 knots, and then swing around to starboard. Now you see she heels in an absolute treat, and I don't really need to touch anything. She's absolutely planted. It requires virtually no input from me at all, and throughout that turn we've only gone down from 30 knots to about 28, which is very impressive for a boat of this kind of scale. And And what's equally very enjoyable is when you're up on the plane and you're having a little turn to starboard and a little turn to port. The reaction from this hull is almost ridiculously enjoyable. It's like a little 14-foot Fletcher in terms of the way it heels into a turn and responds to your helm input. And it obviously doesn't have that kind of fizz and snap and crackle you get with a small lightweight sports boat. But it's a very game driver's boat. And if we push her through to the top end now, a little bit more trim. Now we're running at 31.5 knots, about 117 litres per hour, disappearing from our 500 litre fuel tank. Decibels about 86. Again, it's all very relaxed. Visibility is great. I don't have to shout to be heard. It's all very comfortable. And it's very secure in terms of its handling. It feels like a traditional cruiser before people started specking everything with outboard engines and hanging a couple of metric tons off the back of a transom. The weight all feels like it's exactly where it ought to be. And though it's by no means a race boat, it's certainly a very enjoyable boat to drive. And if we ease her back to sensible speeds, the kind of cruising speed you'd expect to be doing with this boat, you get back down to about 28 knots. Well, look, this is less than 100 litres per hour combined from those D4 300s. And you leave 20% in the tank. That's going to give you a good range of about 115, 120 nautical miles. And that's pretty much where you'd want this boat to be. As I say, it's not a race boat, but for a 40-foot family cruiser with 4 to 6 berths, it's about as close to a throw-about plaything as you could reasonably expect to see. Now, clearly one of the key assets that this smaller boat has inherited from the larger award-winning SR41 is the back-end configuration. And for a start, we've got the high-low platform, optional high-low platform on this boat. That's equipped to carry a 230 kilo tender, so there are plenty of options there. We also have a telescopic ladder and a bracket that fits above there to help pull yourself up and out of the water safely onto that swim platform. The standard fit out here is a fixed platform, but in either case that extends the overall length to around 40'3", which is very significant for a boat called the SR36, and actually it's considerably beamier than the S36 too, so it really is a voluminous boat. But swim platform aside, what's really impressive back here, of course, is this aft facing dinette, big enough for about 6 people to face aft over the water, over your wake, instead of facing forward into the cockpit. And you can, of course, lower this table, in this case on manual brackets rather than electric switches, and then fit an infill for a fairly traditional sunbed. We've also got plenty of storage in here. Back here we've got the gas locker for feeding the starboard wet bar there in the cockpit. We've also got a larger storage space forward and that's mimicked on the other side, where we've got a tremendous size of locker under here, which is large enough easily for your fenders, your lines, your canvases, spare cushions and infills and so on. And as you make your way up into the cockpit, we've got a couple of other features here for Mediterranean cruising, where you tend to more stern to. We've got an elevated section so you can have the cleat higher up. We've also got the buttons for the high-low platform, and we've got a hot and cold shower there, transom shower, and neat little gate to keep everyone safely contained. And when you step into the cockpit itself, we can easily reverse this backrest to open up that forward-facing aft bench. You can also pop an infill in here so that you have a continuous C-shaped dining station right there. Now you would think, wouldn't you, that this table might drop down into place to turn this into an enormous sunbathing platform as well, but actually these are fixed legs on this boat, so that's not going to happen. But I am assured by the guys here that if you want telescopic legs to use that as a sunbathing station, that can be achieved. But either way, given what we have here, one enormous dining station and a second really elegant one aft, it's particularly impressive that we have such a large wet bar to starboard. There's an impressive size of sink here, and the lid from there can be used just to slot into this little hole, creating a splashback to protect your fabrics at the helm seat. You've got a 2-ring gas burner there and an additional hot plate there. That's optional. And down below we've got a couple of little shut-off valves for your gas. We also have a fridge under here, and here another option, an additional pull-out freezer. These catches are very good too, actually, I have to say, very substantial. Some catches you use on boats, you're never quite sure whether you've done them up or undone them, or whether they're halfway, but these really do the job very nicely. If you want to get down into the engine room, you have to first remove the cushion, pop that aside, and then undo the hatch. Relatively compact hatch. There's no ram there to hold it open, so you need to make sure you clip it with this bungee so it doesn't fall down on your head. But once you're down in here, the space is actually much bigger than the aperture for access would have you believe. So here we are, we have a pair of Volvo Penta D4 300s. That's the only diesel option on this boat, actually. You can spec it with a pair of petrol engines, 6.2 litre petrol engines, saving yourself about £35,000. But it seems certain that the diesel option will be the most popular. There's plenty of space in here. We have a hot water tank to starboard. We've got the diesel heating unit up there as well. We have a 500 litre stainless steel tank in the forward section there. And there's loads of space here actually for servicing. The batteries are over to port. Yeah, plenty of space for servicing. And if there's something more substantial that needs doing, apparently this entire aft section can be lifted out to enable proper access. Making your way forward is pretty easy on either side here. We've got good wide side decks, nicely elevated grab rails too, plus rooftop grab rails to supplement that. We've also got a fuel filler here which is recessed with little drain holes, so if you spec this with teak you don't get splashes of petrol all over it and ruin your finish. And as you make your way forward you find a pretty spacious 3-man sun lounger. The Bavaria logo neatly machined into the leading edge of that screen. Headrests here for the sunbeds, and also a pair of cup holders on either side and stainless steel grab rails, plus a central section that you can just pull out without removing everything else, so you can get your gear down into the forward cabin, or just admit a bit of extra light down below for the people down there. Now there are no clever devices to elevate those backrests so you can sit up. There's no convertibility here at all, but the space is good and the fabrics are pretty good too. We got some nice kind of waterproof white clean fabrics that still look quite organic and are quite nice to touch. And in the forward part here, we have an absolutely enormous locker and about 700 miles of chain. You also have access to your water point here, and of course the anchor is remotely operated from the helm. Making our way back, as I say, though there's asymmetry at the aft end of this boat, the port walkway is just as wide as that on the starboard side, again with grab handles on both sides. And obviously when you have this infill in place, it makes it a little more difficult to step into the cockpit, particularly if you have the backrest in place too. But there's plenty of access, as I say, around the back and up the starboard side back into the cockpit if that's the way you want to do it. And once we're back in here, it's worth taking a good close look at this forward section ahead of the aft dining stations, because what we have is a single helm seat to starboard, a compact co-pilot seat to port, and then an elevated moulding with a kind of sunbed on it. On the face of it, that looked a bit odd to me, but it's actually a very comfortable place to sit whether you're underway or stationary. And because we've got an enormous sunroof built into this particular model, it means that if it's a bit breezy you can still perch yourself up on here and have a sunbathe without getting chilly. And it also, of course, enables you to factor in lots of extra volume down in that mid cabin down below, so it works in a lot of ways. We also have very simple opening windows on both sides, mirroring one another for extra ventilation. But because we don't have enormous fiberglass stanchions, and because we have that one-piece screen, the visibility all round is really excellent. When you step down below, the benefits of that big cockpit wet bar become really clear. In this central lounge we have a port dinette which can be very easily converted into an additional bed. We also have the electrics panel to port and the breaker panel just down in there. But because we have the wet bar, we can get away with this relatively compact prep area with a fridge down below, a little bit of storage, and a simple sink plus a couple of power points, so you can make your coffee in the morning without having to go up top. And what's really good about that is the fact that that frees up the space you need for a proper dayheads with separate shower compartment. Yes, the toilet will get wet, but it's a very distinct step up from a regular wet room, and the head height, as in the rest of this main lower deck area, is very impressive indeed. Now if we move back out into this lounge, there's another neat touch here actually, because in addition to the cupboards up here above that compact prep area, we also have this. Now I'll need a couple of hands for this, so excuse me if I wobble the camera around again a little. This section above folds down, and it's pre-wired, as you can see, for the electricity and the aerial for a TV to be mounted there, so that you can sit at this lower lounge and relax, watch the telly. And if you don't spec it like this with the television, then instead of going all the way down, when you drop it down, it will stop midway and operate as a drop-down cutlery drawer, which is a very neat touch indeed. Interestingly, you can spec this boat without this bulkhead, so that the central lounge and the forward cabin are all one continuous space to help maximise the light and really maximise that sense of internal volume. But I suspect that most people will opt for the boat like this, with a private forward cabin, and a very impressive cabin it is too. Again, we've got good views through these big windows, plus opening portholes for a bit of extra ventilation, and we've got these nice fresh modern blinds instead of curtains, which I think always keeps the cabin feeling a little bit cleaner. We've also got a really large double bed. I suspect that's not far off king size actually, perhaps queen. And we have upholstered hull sides to keep you nice and comfortable if you roll over in the night. Now there's the bow thruster, of course, and the battery under the forward part of that bed, plus the water tank. So no space for storage up there, but we have some really good storage directly under the aft end of the bed, with a kind of hinged bracket that enables the storage space to stay open, so you can fill it or empty it with two hands instead of fighting to keep it open with one. Storage is good aft too. We've got proper hanging storage to starboard. We also have a neat little space perhaps for your shoes to keep them tidy. Actually, we also have the piping for the Webasto diesel heater down here. And the same is true on the other side. Let me move my gear out of the way. We have another good little storage box down below. And on this side we have shelving. And the finish is actually very good too. If you look at where the various panels meet and marry up, everything is very clean and well executed. And the lighting's enjoyable too. Yeah, we got some fairly intense spotlights here and there, but we also have recessed ambient lighting. And if I can make these operate as they should, we should also have some dimmable lights forward, yeah, by holding the switch down, and you can reset them. If we move forward again, we've got little reading lights operated with a simple touch on top. And built into the bottom of those, I don't know if we can see that, there's a little USB socket there, plus 240 volt sockets on both sides. In the mid cabin, you really see the benefit both of that chaise longue up above and of these two-tier hull windows. Again, big views, opening windows for ventilation. And when you walk in, there's a lovely changing area that enables you to sit on this long 1.9 metre bench seat support to change without feeling too squashed. And because this is such a long changing zone, such a long bench on this port side, you can actually use this as a third bed in here to supplement the two that we have running transverse beneath that helm station. Now these two can be joined with an infill in this centre section, which makes it so large that you could in fact sleep fore and aft. You could basically sleep about 4 people fore and aft in that bed with the infill in place. So the sleeping capacity down here is really excellent. And if we move towards the head of this bed, again we see that Bavaria's worked hard to arrange these mouldings on the starboard side so that you were able to take full advantage of both of these hull windows rather than just the one. And it also generates a really neat space to prop yourself up and sit and have a read in bed rather than feeling constrained and confined by the head height. One of the most versatile elements of this new boat is the roof. Now, as you can see on this model, we have the hardtop, the HT, and that's a rigid roof with windows that wrap around and a sunroof, an electric sunroof that you open remotely from the helm. That's been ideal for a day like today, where you've had proper British mix of sun and rain and a little bit of wind. It's been ideal. Now you can also spec this boat with a kind of open configuration where you rid yourself of the wraparound windows and you have a half-height windscreen, so that essentially the hardtop becomes like a rigid bimini. The third option and the standard fit out on this boat is a canvas roof, and because that's a concertina sunroof, that enables it to open much further back, a bigger aperture, so you can flood that cockpit with light. And believe it or not, the fourth option is with aft patio doors that come across this section, entirely enclosing that saloon off from the outside world. Well, I said at the very outset that the whole point of this boat, and in fact of the broader SR class, was to combine the greatest talents of the existing S and R class. The volume and the style and the sport, and it does all of that in spades. It's good to drive, the cockpit is magnificent, and the big wet bar frees up all the space you need down below for a proper day heads. You get the 4 options with the roof up here to configure it to the way you want to go boating, and you get the open or the closed forward cabin. The sleeping capacity is also very impressive. You get 2 in the forward cabin, 2 in the mid cabin, an additional one on the mid cabin's port lounge, and another on that convertible dinette in the central lounge. That's 6 people staying on board without even thinking about using any of this cockpit furniture to accommodate more. It's really impressive. It does a great many things really well, and arguably it's actually even more impressive than the SR41, because it does almost everything that boat does, but on a smaller, more manageable, more affordable platform. Now of course this test boat is quite high spec and it will cost you around about £450,000, but the price from figure is £270,000 plus VAT. I think at that kind of money this might be an even more popular boat than the SR41.